The Kansas wind of 1879 whispered through Sarah's small farmhouse, carrying with it the scent of dust and fading memories. At 43, Sarah felt as weathered as the prairie grass outside her window. Her hands, once soft, were now callous from years of tending a small garden and mending worn clothes. Each day felt much like the last, a quiet hum of chores and solitude. Since her dear husband, Thomas, had passed away 3 years prior, the laughter had left her home, replaced by a quiet emptiness. Thomas had been a kind man, with a hearty laugh and strong hands. He had made even the hardest days feel manageable. Now, Sarah often found herself staring at his empty armchair by the fireplace, a pang of loneliness twisting in her chest. She missed his stories, his gentle touch, and even the way he hummed off-key while doing chores. Life alone on the prairie was hard. The nearest town, Harmony Creek, was a bumpy wagon ride away, and while folks there were mostly friendly, Sarah often felt like an outsider, a lone star in a sky full of constellations. Most women her age in Harmony Creek were still busy raising families, their homes full of children's shouts and lively chatter. Sarah's home, however, was silent, save for the ticking of the old grandfather clock and the occasional rustle of a mouse in the walls. Sometimes she'd bake a pie, just as Thomas had loved, hoping the sweet smell would fill the void. But when the pie cooled and no one was there to share it, the silence felt even louder. She'd sigh, wrap a shawl around her shoulders, and sit by the window, watching the endless horizon. The sun would set in a blaze of orange and purple, a beautiful sight that often made her feel even smaller and more alone in the vast world. Sarah knew she was kind, as she tried to be strong, but a deep sadness settled in her heart like the prairie dust after a long, dry spell. She longed for companionship, for a hand to hold, for someone to share the sunsets with once more. But in Harmony Creek, a widowed woman in her 40s was often seen as someone whose story was already written, with no new chapters left to add. One crisp autumn morning, a buzz of excitement, unusual for the quiet town of Harmony Creek, reached Sarah's ears. A flyer nailed to the general store's post announced a bride auction. It wasn't a true auction with money, but rather a public gathering where women seeking husbands would present themselves and men seeking wives would choose. The idea felt strange to Sarah, almost like being a prize at a county fair. Yet, for many lonely souls in these isolated parts of Kansas, it was often the only chance for companionship. The town square, usually home to farmers' wagons and a few barking dogs, was transformed. Benches were set up in rows, facing a makeshift stage. Ribbons, faded but festive, were strung between posts. Wagons from distant farms rumbled in, carrying hopeful women dressed in their Sunday best and eager men in clean shirts and polished boots. Children chased each other, their excited shouts adding to the lively noise. A sense of anticipation hung in the air, thick and sweet like honey. Sarah watched from the edge of the crowd, a mix of curiosity and unease swirling within her. She saw young girls, barely out of their teens, their faces flushed with nerves and dreams. There were also women closer to her age, widows like herself, their eyes holding a quieter, more hopeful glint. The men, a mix of farmers, merchants, and rugged cowboys, whispered among themselves, pointing discreetly at the women as they arrived. It felt less like a celebration of love and more like a careful inspection. The women stood a little taller, smiled a little brighter, each hoping to catch a kind eye. The townsfolk, usually so reserved, were open with their opinions, gossiping about who might be chosen and who might go home alone. Sarah couldn't help but feel a shiver of dread. This wasn't how she'd ever imagined finding love, or even companionship. It felt like a public display, a showcase where one's worth was measured by a man's glance. Despite her deep loneliness, a part of her rebelled against the whole idea. Yet a tiny flicker of hope, stubborn and persistent, made her stay. She wondered if, just maybe, someone might look past her age and see the kind heart she still offered. As the first few women stepped onto the small stage, their names called out by the town's judge, Sarah's heart began to beat like a trapped bird. Her hands, clasped tightly in front of her, felt damp. She smoothed her simple calico dress, wishing she had something finer, something that didn't show the faint patch on the sleeve. Her reflection in the dusty window of the general store earlier that morning had shown her the truth. Fine lines fanned out from the corners of her eyes, and streaks of silver gleamed in her brown hair. She was no longer the fresh-faced girl she once was. A wave of nerves washed over her, making her stomach flutter. She worried deeply about what people would think. Would they see only her age, the weariness that life had etched upon her face? Would they whisper that she was too old, or not pretty enough? She remembered her youth, a time when her cheeks were rosy and her laugh came easily. Back then, her eyes sparkled with dreams of a loving home and a happy future. She had been full of hope, believing that life would always be a bright path ahead. Now, that hopeful girl felt very far away. Sarah watched as a young woman with bright red ribbons in her hair was chosen almost instantly by a smiling farmer. The crowd clapped, and the girl blushed, stepping down with her new husband. Another, a quiet seamstress, found a match with a gruff but kind-looking blacksmith. Each pairing brought a mix of relief and longing to Sarah. She took a deep, shaky breath. It felt foolish, standing there among so many younger women. Her mind raced with all the reasons she might be overlooked. Her farm, while tidy, was small. Her hands were strong, but not delicate. Her voice, usually soft, felt like it might crack if she tried to speak. The fear of being rejected, of standing alone while others found happiness, was a heavy stone in her heart. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to gather her courage, preparing herself for the inevitable disappointment that seemed to hang in the air around her. She just wanted to be seen, truly seen, for the kind woman she was, not just for the years she carried. Next up, the judge's booming voice cut through the air. We have Sarah Miller. The sound of her name, usually so familiar, now felt like a harsh pronouncement. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat. Her legs felt heavy, but she somehow managed to move forward, stepping onto the small wooden stage. The boards creaked beneath her worn boots, a sound that seemed to echo her own fragility. She stood there, her hands clasped, trying to meet the gazes of the crowd, but her eyes kept darting to the ground. A ripple went through the onlookers. The excited chatter didn't stop, but it changed. Whispers started, soft at first, then growing louder. Sarah could hear bits and pieces. Look at her, and she's surely too old. A few women in the front row put their hands over their mouths, giggling behind them. Then, a sharp, clear laugh pierced the air from the back of the crowd. Too old to wed, someone called out, and a few more chuckles followed. Sarah felt her cheeks burn. It was exactly what she had feared, even worse. The laughter felt like tiny, stinging needles pricking at her heart. Her carefully built composure crumbled. She felt exposed, vulnerable, and deeply ashamed. Her heart, which had been beating so fast, now felt like a heavy stone sinking deep within her chest, dragging her down. It wasn't just the words. It was the cruel, dismissive tone, the way they looked at her, as if she were a dusty, forgotten item in an attic. She tightened her grip on her hands, her knuckles white. She wanted nothing more than to run, to disappear into the vast Kansas prairie and never be seen again. The hopeful flicker that had brought her here was now extinguished, replaced by a cold, aching emptiness. She braced herself for the silence that would surely follow, the silence that meant no one would step forward, that she would be sent home alone, her fears confirmed in front of the entire town. She looked out at the sea of faces, none of them offering kindness, only judgment. The air grew heavy with her embarrassment, and a single tear threatened to fall. The laughter and whispers swirled around Sarah, a cruel wind pushing her further into herself. She kept her gaze fixed on the scuffed wooden planks of the stage, unable to meet the eyes of the mocking crowd. The silence she dreaded seemed to stretch, heavy and full of judgment. She felt tears welling, hot and unwelcome, blurring her vision. This was it, she thought, the final humiliation. She was truly alone, and everyone could see it. Just as the judge cleared his throat, about to dismiss her, a movement caught Sarah's eye. A figure detached itself from the back of the crowd, moving with a steady, determined stride. Sarah dared to lift her head slightly. He was tall, dressed in practical denim trousers and a sturdy, faded blue shirt, with a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He was a cowboy, much younger than her, perhaps in his late 20s or early 30s. His shoulders were broad, and he carried himself with quiet strength that seemed out of place in the giggling crowd. As he drew closer, he lifted his head, and Sarah saw his face. His eyes were a clear, honest blue, and a kind, gentle look softened his rugged features. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a calm resolve. He walked straight toward the stage, ignoring the sudden halt in the crowd chatter. The whispers died down completely, replaced by a stunned silence. Everyone watched him, their expressions shifting from amusement to utter surprise. He reached the foot of the stage, his eyes fixed on Sarah. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter. It was as if no one else existed, just the two of them in the buzzing stillness of the square. Sarah, still trembling, could only stare, her mind unable to grasp what was happening. This young, strong cowboy, Eli, whose name she didn't even know, was approaching her, the too old to wed woman. The silence grew heavier, filled with the collective gasp of the townspeople. All eyes were on him, and on her, waiting to see what this unexpected turn would bring. Eli climbed the 2 wooden steps to the stage, his boots making soft thuds that echoed in the sudden quiet. He stood before Sarah, his presence warm and steady. He was taller than she expected, and his clean, worn clothes smelled faintly of leather and fresh air. His blue eyes, so full of kindness, met hers directly. Sarah felt a strange mix of fear and a tiny spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time, a flicker of hope. He reached out his hand, strong and calloused, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he took her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm, a silent promise. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She looked at their joined hands, then back up at his face, searching for any sign of a trick, a joke, anything but what she was seeing. Then Eli spoke. His voice was calm and clear, cutting through the heavy silence of the square. It wasn't loud, but it carried, reaching every ear in the stunned crowd. "I'll marry you," he said simply, his gaze never leaving Sarah's eyes. The words hung in the air, clear and firm, like a bell ringing in the quiet. Sarah's mind struggled to make sense of them. Asterisk, "I'll marry you." Asterisk, the phrase was so direct, so unexpected. It was as if a sudden gust of wind had cleared away all the dust and sorrow that had been clouding her world. She could barely believe her ears. Had she truly heard him? Was this real? A gasp rippled through the crowd. The judge, who had been leaning forward, his mouth slightly open, now straightened up, his eyes wide with shock. The townspeople, who had been whispering cruel jokes just moments before, now stood frozen, their faces a mixture of disbelief and confusion. Eli, however, stood unmoving, his hand still holding Sarah's, his kind eyes steady. He hadn't just spoken to her. He had spoken to the entire town, declaring his intention without a hint of hesitation or regret. Sarah felt a warmth spread from their joined hands, a warmth that slowly, cautiously, began to chase away the cold shame. As Eli's words echoed in the stunned silence, Sarah's initial shock began to give way to a different feeling. She looked at his kind blue eyes, then at the firm grip of his hand around hers. A wave of uncertainty washed over her. Why would a young, strong cowboy like him choose her? It didn't make sense. Her mind, so used to disappointment, immediately sought a logical explanation for this unbelievable turn of events. Are you sure?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Are you doing this because you feel sorry for me?" Eli's gaze softened, but his expression remained steady. He shook his head gently. "No, ma'am. I'm sure." Still, Sarah couldn't shake the thought. The town had just openly mocked her, calling her too old to wed. Perhaps Eli, a good-hearted man, simply couldn't stand to see her suffer such public shame. Maybe he was trying to be a hero, to save her from utter embarrassment. The idea that he might truly want to marry her, an older woman with a quiet life and a small farm, seemed too far-fetched, too good to be true. Her heart, so recently bruised, was hesitant to believe in such a sudden, unexpected kindness. She pictured the knowing looks of the townspeople, the way they'd whisper behind their hands. They would surely say he took pity on her, that she was a charity case. This thought brought a fresh sting of pain. While his gesture was undeniably brave and kind, it felt heavy with the weight of her own self-doubt. She couldn't help but wonder if his clear, firm words were born of genuine affection or noble desire to rescue her from a difficult situation. It was a question that swirled in her mind, clouding the unexpected light his presence brought. She longed to believe him, but years of quiet solitude and recent humiliation had made her wary of sudden, unearned gifts. In the days and weeks that followed the surprising bride auction, Eli proved his intentions not with grand words, but with steady, quiet actions. He didn't just move into Sarah's small farmhouse. He settled in, making himself useful without ever overstepping. He'd rise before the sun, heading out to the fields to help with the planting, his strong back bending to the task. He fixed the fence that had sagged for months, mended the leaky roof of the barn, and even sharpened the rusty tools that Sarah had long since given up on. Sarah watched him, her initial doubt slowly starting to melt away like snow in spring sunshine. He didn't just work hard, he worked with her. If she was in the garden, he'd be there, pulling weeds or carrying water. He listened patiently when she spoke about her plans for the chickens or the upcoming harvest, always offering thoughtful advice, never dismissing her ideas. More than his help with chores, it was the small things that truly began to change Sarah's mind. He always pulled out her chair at the dinner table. He'd bring her wildflowers he found by the creek, tucking them into an old jar. He'd make sure she had the biggest piece of pie, or that her coffee was just right. He treated her not just with kindness, but with deep respect, as if her thoughts and feelings were the most important things in the world. And he made her laugh. His stories about his cowboy days, about stubborn horses and funny mishaps, brought a joy to her home that had been missing for years. She found herself smiling more, a real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. With Eli, she felt a safety she hadn't known since Thomas passed away. It wasn't just physical safety, but a feeling of being truly cared for, of having a steady, strong presence by her side. Each passing day, his quiet devotion built a bridge over her doubts, showing her that his promise was not one of pity, but of true, deep care. One evening, as the Kansas sky turned fiery red and gold, Sarah and Eli sat on the porch swing, watching the last light fade. Eli had just finished telling a funny story about a runaway calf, and Sarah was still chuckling softly. The quiet comfort between them felt as natural as the setting sun. "Sarah," Eli began, his voice a little softer than usual, "I know you wondered why I chose you that day." Sarah's smile faded slightly, and she looked down at her hands. "I did," she admitted. I thought you felt sorry for me. After all the cruel words." Eli gently took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her skin. "Never pity, Sarah," he said, his blue eyes earnest as they met hers. "From the moment I saw you, standing up there so bravely, even when they were laughing, I saw something special. I saw your strength, the way you carry yourself, the kindness in your eyes, even when you were hurting." He paused, looking out at the darkening prairie. "And since I've been here, I've seen so much more. Your quiet courage, how you keep this farm going all by yourself. Your gentle spirit, how you care for everything around you. Your goodness shines brighter than any young girl's fleeting blush." He turned back to her, his gaze unwavering. "I admire you, Sarah, more than words can say. I love your hands, worn from work. I love the wisdom in your eyes. I love the way you laugh, truly laugh now." His words were a warm balm to Sarah's heart, healing old wounds she hadn't realized were still so raw. He saw her, truly saw her, not just the lines on her face or the years she carried, but the very essence of who she was. The deep, lingering doubt that had shadowed her since the auction finally lifted like a heavy fog burning off in the morning sun. In that moment, under the vast, star-dusted Kansas sky, Sarah realized with a profound certainty that Eli's love was real. It wasn't pity. It was a deep, true affection, born of respect and admiration. A tear, this time not of shame, but of overwhelming happiness, tracked down her cheek. She finally understood. He loved her. Even though Sarah's heart was now full of a new, certain joy, the world outside their little farmhouse remained unchanged. The townspeople of Harmony Creek, accustomed to their predictable routines and familiar faces, found Eli and Sarah's pairing a never-ending source of surprise. When Sarah and Eli rode into town for supplies, heads would turn. Whispers would follow them like dust motes in the sunlight. "Did you see that?" one woman might say to another, fanning herself with a newspaper. "He's so young and well, she's Sarah Miller." "It's a strange match," another would agree, shaking her head. "He must be after her land, or perhaps he just felt sorry for her." The old doubts, banished from Sarah's own heart, still lingered in the minds of others. Some folks even giggled, recalling the "too old to wed" comment from the auction. Sarah, who had once been so sensitive to their opinions, now found their gossip less painful. Eli, however, seemed not to notice it at all. He walked with a steady stride, his hand often resting gently on the small of her back, or his fingers intertwined with hers. When someone stared too long, he would simply offer a polite nod, his blue eyes calm and unbothered. "Don't you mind what they say?" Sarah asked him one afternoon as they drove their wagon back to the farm, the sounds of town slowly fading behind them. Eli chuckled softly, tightening his grip on her hand. "What they say doesn't matter, Sarah. Their words don't build fences or plant crops or make a home warm. All that matters is what's between us, right here." He tapped her heart gently with his free hand. "I only care about you. Their opinions are just wind, and we've got bigger things to tend to." His unwavering confidence was a shield against the town's judgment. He loved her openly, without shame or reservation, and in doing so, he taught Sarah to love herself in the same way. The whispers might continue, but they no longer held power. For Eli, Sarah was his world, and that was all that mattered. The day came when Eli and Sarah decided it was time to make their union official. Holding hands, they walked towards the judge's office, located in the small, sturdy building that also served as the town hall. The air was crisp, and the sun shone brightly, reflecting off the dusty street. Sarah felt a flutter of nerves, but this time it was a joyful anticipation, not fear. Eli's presence beside her was a comforting warmth. As they stepped inside, the familiar scent of old paper and ink filled the air. Judge Thompson, the very same man who had presided over the bride auction, sat behind his large wooden desk, spectacles perched on his nose as he reviewed some documents. He was a stern-looking man, with a thick mustache and eyes that rarely missed a thing. When he looked up and saw them standing there, his eyes, usually so sharp, widened in clear surprise. A small "oh" escaped his lips, and his spectacles nearly slipped off his nose. He remembered Sarah, of course, from the auction, and he certainly remembered Eli's unexpected declaration. But to see them together, hand in hand, looking so comfortable and happy, was clearly not what he had expected. "Good morning, Judge Thompson," Eli said, his voice polite and steady. "We've come to get our marriage license." The judge blinked, then blinked again. He looked from Eli to Sarah, then back to Eli, as if trying to solve a puzzle. The surprise on his face was plain for all to see. It was a mixture of disbelief and perhaps a touch of embarrassment, remembering the scene he had witnessed just a few months prior. He cleared his throat, pushing his spectacles back into place. "A marriage license, you say?" he managed, his voice a little hoarse. He had seen many couples come through his office, but none quite like this. Sarah offered a small, shy smile, squeezing Eli's hand gently. His presence made her feel brave, even under the judge's surprised gaze. This was their moment, a quiet victory after all the whispers and doubts. Judge Thompson, still looking as if he'd swallowed a whole persimmon, slowly pulled a fresh marriage license form from a drawer. He dipped his pen into the inkwell, his movements stiff. The silence in the small office was thick with his unspoken surprise. He glanced at Sarah, then at Eli, his eyes scanning their faces as if searching for a hidden joke. But there was only quiet resolve in Eli's steady gaze and a gentle happiness in Sarah's soft smile. With a sigh that seemed to carry all the town's disbelief, the judge began to fill out the form. His pen scratched across the paper, making the only sound besides the gentle ticking of clock. When he finally pushed the document across the desk, it was with a reluctant flourish. "Sign here," he mumbled, pointing to the lines. Eli signed first, his hand firm and clear. Then Sarah, her hand steady, added her name. "And now, my official signature," the judge announced, his voice regaining some of its usual authority, though his eyes still held a glimmer of wonder. He signed the paper, making it real, binding their lives together. As they stepped out of the office, the news seemed to travel faster than the wind. A small crowd had gathered outside, drawn by the unusual sight of Eli and Sarah going to the judge. The same people who had laughed at Sarah, who had whispered about Eli, now watched in stunned silence. Their mouths hung open, their faces a mixture of shock and sheer disbelief. The woman who had called Sarah too old to wed now stood with her jaw dropped, unable to utter a sound. Eli squeezed Sarah's hand, a warm, reassuring pressure. He met the eyes of the onlookers with a quiet confidence, his chin held high. Sarah, feeling his unwavering support, looked at the crowd too. No longer did their stares sting. No longer did their judgment hold power. She smiled, a true, bright smile, not just for Eli, but for herself. Together, hand in hand, Eli and Sarah walked past the shocked townspeople, ready to begin their new life, their love a quiet, strong answer to all the doubts and unkindness.